When history remembers South Africa's turbulent journey from apartheid to democracy, one figure rises above all others: Nelson Mandela, the man who became the country's first black president and a global icon of reconciliation, justice, and human dignity. His presidency, spanning from 1994 to 1999, was not merely a political office but a moral mission, a transformative era that redefined South Africa's identity and inspired the world. Mandela's ascension to the presidency was a culmination of decades of struggle against one of the harshest systems of racial segregation the world had ever known. By the time he stood for election in 1994, he had already endured 27 years in prison, emerging as a symbol of resistance and hope. The 1994 elections were historic. South Africa's first multiracial democratic vote. Millions of people, many of whom had been denied the right to vote their entire lives, queued for hours, some for the first time casting a ballot. The sight of black South Africans voting alongside whites was revolutionary. For many elders, the ballot represented not just political choice, but the validation of their humanity. Mandela's African National Congress, ANC, won decisively, and with that victory, Mandela became the first black president of the Republic of South Africa. In his inaugural address on May 10, 1994, Mandela spoke to a crowd filled with dignitaries, freedom fighters, and citizens who had long awaited this moment. His words echoed across the Union buildings in Pretoria. He promised to guide the nation out of the darkness of apartheid and into the light of a democratic, non-racial, and non-sexist future. He did not focus on triumph, but on responsibility, reminding the world that true freedom comes with a duty to build peace. Mandela's presidency was marked by a central mission: ensuring a peaceful transition from apartheid's brutality to a functioning democracy that could unite its deeply divided people. The world expected revenge, but Mandela offered forgiveness. Many feared bloodshed, but he pursued peace. Rather than punishing the former oppressors, he sought to integrate them into a shared future. He understood that democracy built on bitterness would collapse under its own weight. Mandela emphasized nation-building, a term that became central to his presidency. He traveled across provinces, speaking to both black and white communities, insisting that South Africa would not survive as two nations, one privileged and one impoverished, but only as a single, united people. His vision was not utopian, but deeply practical. Without reconciliation, the country would slide into civil conflict. Perhaps the most defining initiative of Mandela's presidency was the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The TRC became a pioneering model for transitional justice worldwide. Its purpose was not to ignore the crimes of the past, but to confront them in a way that allowed victims and perpetrators to acknowledge the truth without perpetuating cycles of vengeance. Victims of apartheid were given a platform to share their stories of suffering, while perpetrators who confessed their crimes were granted amnesty. Some criticized this as lenient, but Mandela defended it as the only way forward. He knew the alternative would be endless trials, imprisonments, and renewed hostilities. For many South Africans, the TRC was both painful and healing. Families wept as they heard the details of loved ones' deaths. Yet, paradoxically, this act of truth-telling brought dignity back to victims who had long been silenced. Mandela often remarked that the truth is the first step toward freedom, and the TRC embodied that philosophy. Mandela's government introduced significant reforms to address the injustices of apartheid. Though his presidency lasted only one term, it was marked by impactful social policies. Healthcare. Free healthcare was introduced for children under 6 and for pregnant women. This move addressed the severe inequalities of the apartheid era, where hospitals for black citizens were underfunded and neglected. For many poor families, this was the first time they experienced dignified access to medicine. Education. Public spending on education was expanded dramatically. Mandela called education the great engine of personal development. Schools that had been neglected under apartheid received increased funding, teacher training, and materials. Land restitution. The Restitution of Land Rights Act sought to correct historical land dispossession. While implementation was slow, the symbolic steps showed that South Africa was committed to justice. Mandela often reminded people that land was not just about property, but about dignity and heritage. Housing and infrastructure. His administration initiated programs to build low-cost housing, provide access to clean water, and electrify townships. The image of a rural household switching on an electric light for the first time became a powerful metaphor for South Africa's rebirth. Beyond policy, Mandela's greatest strength as president lay in his ability to use symbolism to inspire unity. One of the most famous examples occurred in 1995, during the Rugby World Cup, hosted in South Africa. Rugby had long been seen as a sport of the white minority, a symbol of Afrikaner pride. Yet Mandela donned the green jersey of the Springboks, the national rugby team, and publicly supported them. When South Africa won the championship, Mandela presented the trophy to Captain Francois Pienaar, creating an unforgettable image of national unity. In that moment, sport became more than a game. It became a metaphor for reconciliation. This act showed Mandela's genius. He understood that nations are not held together by laws alone, but by shared symbols, collective pride, and gestures of empathy. Mandela's presidency was far from easy. The weight of expectations was enormous. Millions of South Africans, long marginalized, expected immediate transformation. The realities of poverty, inequality, and unemployment were daunting. Crime surged in the post-apartheid years, and the economy struggled under the weight of historical injustices and global pressures. Corruption and inefficiency in some government programs frustrated citizens. International investors were cautious, and Mandela had to strike a balance between economic pragmatism and social justice. He resisted calls for rapid nationalization, believing stability was necessary for investment. At the same time, he pushed for redistribution policies to uplift the poor. Despite these challenges, Mandela's leadership prevented what many feared, a collapse into chaos or authoritarianism. He maintained democratic institutions, defended press freedom, and built a culture of accountability. As president, Mandela's stature extended far beyond South Africa's borders. He became a global symbol of peace and justice. Leaders from every continent, regardless of ideology, admired him. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993, shared with F.W. de Klerk, the last apartheid president. But his recognition did not stop there. Universities granted him honorary degrees, cities named streets after him, and children around the world learned his name as synonymous with freedom. Mandela's humility only amplified his influence. When he traveled abroad, he insisted on meeting not only with presidents and prime ministers, but also with ordinary citizens, community leaders, and children. His message was simple yet profound. Dignity belonged to everyone. Within South Africa, Mandela was lovingly called Madiba, his Xhosa clan name, a title of respect and affection. He became known as the father of the nation, not because he solved every problem, but because he embodied the spirit of unity, hope, and resilience. He would visit rural villages, sit with elders, and listen to their concerns. He would attend school events and encourage children to dream big. These gestures reinforce his belief that leadership is not about commanding from above, but about serving from within. Mandela also understood the power of humility. He insisted on making his own bed in the presidential residence, reminding staff that he was a servant of the people, not a king. Such small acts carry profound symbolic weight. Perhaps one of Mandela's most remarkable acts was his decision to step down after one term. In a continent where leaders often clung to power indefinitely, Mandela chose to leave the presidency in 1999, honoring his promise to serve only one term. This decision reinforced the principles of democracy and set a precedent in South Africa and beyond. By voluntarily stepping aside, Mandela demonstrated that the presidency was not about personal glory, but about national service. He once said, "I do not want to be remembered as someone who clung to power, but as someone who relinquished it with grace." That philosophy became part of his legacy. Mandela did not retreat into silence after leaving office. Instead, he embraced a new role as a global elder statesman. Through the Nelson Mandela Foundation, he championed causes such as human rights, poverty reduction, and the battle against HIV/AIDS, which had reached epidemic levels in South Africa. His voice carried moral weight. When Mandela spoke, whether about the war in Iraq, the AIDS crisis, or global inequality, the world listened. He reminded leaders that politics without morality was empty, and that progress without compassion was dangerous. He also became an advocate for young people, encouraging them to take responsibility for shaping the future. He believed his generation had brought freedom, but it was up to the next to transform that freedom into prosperity. Mandela's legacy is vast and multi-layered. 1. Reconciliation. He transformed South Africa from a nation on the brink of civil war into a fragile but functioning democracy. 2. Justice with forgiveness. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission became a model for post-conflict societies worldwide. 3. Equality in policy. From healthcare to land reform, he began dismantling the structural inequalities of apartheid. 4. Moral leadership. He set an example of humility, integrity, and accountability rarely seen in global politics. 5. Global inspiration. Mandela's life continues to inspire movements for freedom, justice, and human dignity across the globe. Mandela's presidency was not perfect, nor was he, but in his imperfection lay his humanity. He was a leader who admitted mistakes, who listened, who forgave, and who never allowed bitterness to define him. Between 1994 and 1999, Nelson Mandela's presidency was more than a political chapter. It was a moral transformation. He was a leader who taught that reconciliation is stronger than revenge, that forgiveness can heal deeper than punishment, and that true leadership is service. He showed the world that a nation scarred by centuries of oppression could be reborn through democracy, compassion, and vision. And when he left office, he reminded us all that greatness lies not in holding on to power, but in knowing when to pass it on. Mandela remains, to this day, a universal symbol of peace, justice, and the enduring power of the human spirit.